Part 1. John Lennon. The night was cold and still in New York. Winter pressed against the sidewalks. The city felt quiet in a way that made every sound sharper. This was not just another evening. This was the moment when an entire era quietly came to an end. John Lennon was not walking as a legend that night. He was walking as a man returning home. Yet the world had never allowed him to be only that. John Lennon was more than a musician. He had become a symbol of peace, idealism, and moral defiance. His voice carried hope during years defined by war and unrest. For millions, he represented the belief that art could soften power and kindness could reshape history. That belief made him loved. It also made him dangerously visible. The most unsettling truth of this story is not the act itself, but the closeness that came before it. The person who ended Lennon's life was not distant. He was not hidden. He stood close enough to speak. Close enough to look into Lennon's eyes. Close enough to be treated with warmth. Mark David Chapman did not look like a threat. He appeared ordinary. Slightly awkward. Quiet. A fan among fans. No dramatic gestures. No raised voice. To those around him, he blended in perfectly. That ordinariness is what made him invisible. Inside Chapman's mind, something fragile had already broken. He carried a storm of religious obsession and literary fixation. He was consumed by a novel that blurred fantasy and identity. He no longer read the story. He stepped inside it. He convinced himself that he was the main character. That the world around him was fake. That famous people were imposters. In his twisted logic, John Lennon became the ultimate symbol of hypocrisy. A man who sang about peace while living in luxury. A voice that preached simplicity while surrounded by wealth. Chapman did not want to meet Lennon as a fan. He wanted validation. He wanted recognition. He wanted his confusion to be resolved by proximity to greatness. He believed that by confronting Lennon, something inside him would settle. Instead, it hardened. Earlier that evening, Lennon and Yoko Ono left their residence to go to the studio. Outside, a small group waited. Chapman stepped forward holding a record. Lennon stopped. He did not rush. He did not wave from a distance. He took the album. He signed it. He smiled. He asked if that was all that was needed. That moment should have ended everything. A simple exchange. A memory. A fan fulfilled. But for Chapman, it did the opposite. The kindness did not calm him. It intensified his fixation. The distance between idol and admirer vanished. Lennon became human. Chapman could no longer place him on a pedestal. He now saw him as reachable. A photographer captured the moment. The image froze history. The artist signing his name. The admirer watching closely. A moment that would later feel unbearable to look at. Proof that danger does not always announce itself. Chapman stayed. Hour after hour. Standing in the freezing air. Holding the signed album. Replaying the interaction again and again. Waiting. Time slowed. The city moved on. But he did not. When the limousine returned, there was no warning. No dramatic confrontation. No shouted words. Only sudden movement. Sound. Then silence that felt heavier than noise. Lennon managed to reach the entrance. His voice was faint. Confused. Then he collapsed. What followed felt unreal. Yoko's cries cut through the night. Bystanders froze. A doorman acted instinctively. Chapman did not flee. He did not resist. He removed his coat neatly. He opened his book. He waited. There was no panic in him. No visible fear. He had already crossed the boundary he believed would give him meaning. In his mind, the act was complete. The world would now know his name. When authorities arrived, Lennon was rushed away. The injuries were too severe. He did not survive. News spread across the planet in minutes. The announcement came through a sports broadcast. People listening at home did not understand what they had heard. Disbelief turned into grief. Streets filled with strangers holding each other. Songs once associated with hope now carried unbearable weight. Chapman later admitted what had driven him. He spoke of voices. Of evil forces. But he also spoke of fame. He believed that by taking a legend, he would inherit significance. That his emptiness would finally be filled. That history would remember him. This is the core horror of the story. The motive was not anger. Not revenge. It was possession. A desire to own a piece of immortality. To step out of anonymity through destruction. The case reshaped how the world understood celebrity. It shattered the illusion that admiration is always safe. It exposed the risk hidden inside unchecked obsession. From that moment forward, artists would never approach fans the same way again. Distance replaced openness. Security replaced trust. John Lennon gave his time. His warmth. His attention. In return, the world lost his voice. His future. His presence. The question that remains is not simple. Was Chapman a broken mind lost in delusion, or a cold narcissist chasing notoriety through the unthinkable? Different answers reveal different fears. Your interpretation of his motive may say more about how you see fandom itself, and the thin line between love and control. In the next part, the danger moves from a quiet sidewalk to a crowded stage, where applause could not protect a guitarist who believed the audience was family. Part 2, Dimebag Darrell. The stage was supposed to be the safest place in the room. Lights above. Music loud enough to drown out fear. A space where energy flowed one way, from the band to the crowd. That illusion collapsed in a single night, inside a packed club in Ohio, when the barrier between performer and audience vanished without warning. Dimebag Darrell was not distant royalty. He was the opposite. A guitarist who treated fans like friends. A musician who stayed after shows, poured drinks, laughed loudly, hugged strangers, remembered faces. In the metal world, he represented freedom and brotherhood. Loud music. Open hearts. No walls. He wore his fame lightly. Camouflage shorts. A grin that never felt rehearsed. On stage, his guitar tone was sharp and fearless. Off stage, he was generous to a fault. Many people believed nothing bad could happen to someone like him. That belief was wrong. The date carried an eerie weight. The same calendar day that marked the death of another music icon decades earlier. A coincidence that would later feel cruel. As if history had chosen to repeat a lesson the world still had not learned. The man who would end Dimebag's life did not arrive as a screaming intruder. He came quietly. Nathan Gale was a former Marine whose mind had fractured under untreated illness. He lived inside a web of delusions that rewrote reality to suit his pain. In his version of the world, he was not a fan. He was a creator. A visionary whose ideas had been stolen. Gale believed the band had taken his thoughts. His words. His identity. When Pantera ended, he did not see a business decision. He saw betrayal. He felt erased. Forgotten. Humiliated by people he believed owed him recognition. That resentment grew unchecked, feeding on isolation and paranoia. Security at the venue was minimal. The atmosphere was casual. The crowd was dense. Gale did not buy a ticket. He climbed over a fence. He bypassed the usual obstacles with ease. No one noticed him moving through the shadows. No alarms. No raised voices. Just another body slipping into the noise. On stage, Dimebag was performing with his new band. The sound was heavy. The crowd was alive. When Gale approached, some thought it was part of the show. Metal concerts often blurred chaos and performance. Movement on stage did not immediately signal danger. Then everything changed. The moment unfolded faster than understanding. A sudden shift. A violent interruption of rhythm. The music stopped not with silence, but with confusion. People froze. Others screamed. Some stood still, unable to process that what they were seeing was real. Dimebag fell. The symbol of joy and openness lay motionless under harsh stage lights. Panic spread through the room like smoke. What had been celebration turned into disbelief. But the tragedy did not end there. In the chaos, people moved toward danger instead of away from it. The band's security chief charged forward without protection. A fan climbed onto the stage to help. A roadie followed. None of them hesitated. Each acted on instinct, driven by loyalty and courage. Their bravery cost them everything. Lives were lost in moments that felt endless to those who witnessed them. Screams echoed. Bodies fell. The club became unrecognizable. A place once filled with music turned into a scene no one could forget. The rampage ended only when law enforcement arrived and acted decisively. A single shot brought the nightmare to a halt. The room fell into a heavy stillness broken only by sobbing and shock. Dimebag Darrell was gone. Along with him, others who had tried to save him. Heroes whose names would never be as widely known, but whose actions mattered just as much. The aftermath rippled through the music world. Grief mixed with fear. Questions surfaced that had no easy answers. How could this happen? Why was the stage no longer safe? How did someone so open become so vulnerable? For metal fans, the loss was personal. Dimebag had never placed himself above his audience. That closeness had defined his legacy. It had also exposed him. From that night forward, everything changed. Barriers appeared where there had once been none. Security increased. Distance replaced intimacy. The era of unrestricted access between artists and fans quietly ended. The lesson was harsh and permanent. Passion does not equal safety. Admiration can coexist with instability. Not every smile in the crowd is harmless. Dimebag Darrell lived by connection. He believed music erased divisions. His death proved that some divisions run deeper than sound. What remains is the uncomfortable question of responsibility. Was this a failure of security? Of mental health systems? Of a culture that romanticized closeness without protection? Each answer reveals a different fracture in the system. Your interpretation of where that failure truly began may shape how you see live music forever. Next, the danger leaves the stage and enters the digital world, where a young singer believed the screen made her safe, and kindness once again came with a fatal cost. Part 3, Christina Grimmie. Christina Grimmie felt familiar to millions of people who had never met her. She sang from her bedroom. She spoke directly to a camera. She laughed, joked, and shared pieces of her daily life. Viewers did not feel like an audience. They felt like friends. Some felt like family. In the age of online platforms, this kind of intimacy became normal. It also became dangerous. She did not rise through record labels or closed doors. She rose through comments, likes, and subscriptions. Her voice was strong, but her appeal went deeper than talent. She felt reachable. Approachable. Real. People believed they knew her because she spoke to them alone through a screen. The illusion was powerful. This illusion is called a parasocial relationship. It exists when one side feels emotional closeness while the other side does not know the person exists. Most of the time, it remains harmless. Sometimes it turns obsessive. In rare cases, it becomes lethal. Kevin Loibl lived entirely inside that illusion. He did not see Christina as a performer. He saw her as someone meant for him. He watched her videos repeatedly. He memorized her expressions. He interpreted smiles and gestures as private signals. His world slowly narrowed until everything revolved around her image on a screen. He reshaped his life around a fantasy. He changed how he looked. He altered his habits. He told people around him that he and Christina were destined to be together. Not as a dream. As a certainty. To him, the relationship already existed. It just had not been acknowledged publicly. The internet fed this belief. Algorithms rewarded fixation. Endless access erased boundaries. Christina's kindness reinforced it without intention. She thanked fans. She responded warmly. She treated supporters as equals. That openness was sincere. It was also misread. When Kevin discovered signs that Christina might be seeing someone else, the fantasy collapsed. What had felt like love twisted into resentment. Possession replaced admiration. In his mind, rejection had occurred even though no relationship had ever existed. The emotional crash was violent. The meet and greet after her show was informal. No barriers. No heavy security. Christina wanted to meet the people who supported her. She hugged fans. She smiled. She thanked them. The environment was built on trust. Kevin stood in line like everyone else. No one noticed anything unusual. He carried a plan formed inside isolation and obsession. Christina looked up and saw another fan. She opened her arms. That moment defines the tragedy. A gesture of warmth met by irreversible intent. The setting offered no protection. Kindness became vulnerability. Chaos followed. Panic spread. Screams replaced music. Christina collapsed. Her brother reacted without hesitation. He moved instinctively, driven by love and desperation. He tackled the attacker, stopping further harm. In that struggle, the fantasy ended. Kevin turned the weapon on himself. The story closed without answers from the person who caused it. Christina was taken to the hospital. The damage was too severe. She did not survive. News traveled instantly through the same platforms that had built her career. Fans felt the loss as if it were personal. Many truly believed it was. The aftermath exposed a painful reality. Online fame removes distance without removing risk. Screens do not protect. Familiarity does not equal safety. The same tools that create connection can nurture obsession in vulnerable minds. Her death forced the industry to rethink safety. Small events no longer felt harmless. Intimate settings required precautions once reserved for arenas. The cost of access became clear. Christina Grimmie lived openly. She trusted her audience. She believed kindness was the right way to exist in the world. That belief shaped her success. It also shaped her fate. The hardest question remains unresolved. Did social platforms play a role by encouraging emotional dependency? Or does responsibility rest entirely on individuals who cross the line between admiration and delusion? There is no simple answer. Only consequences. Her legacy is not fear. It is a warning. A reminder that digital closeness must be balanced with boundaries. That empathy must coexist with protection. How you answer the question of responsibility may reflect how you see your own relationship with the people you follow online. Next, the story moves away from the screen and into the streets, where a hometown hero chose to stay close to his roots and paid the highest price for believing loyalty could save him. Part 4, Nipsey Hussle. Nipsey Hussle represented more than music. He stood for ownership, patience, and long vision in a place shaped by short futures. He spoke about discipline in neighborhoods trained to expect loss. He preached building when survival often meant leaving. His message reached far beyond records and stages. It reached the streets that raised him. He could have disappeared into comfort. Many before him did. Instead, he returned to the same blocks that taught him how fragile life could be. He bought property. He hired locals. He invested in education. He believed presence mattered more than distance. Staying was not nostalgia. Staying was strategy. To supporters, this made him a hero. To others, it made him a mirror. Success reflected failure. Growth highlighted stagnation. Not everyone celebrates the rise of someone who escaped the same gravity they never could. Eric Holder lived in that shadow. He came from the same environment. He watched Nipsey ascend while his own life remained stuck. That contrast created a quiet resentment that hardened over time. It was not built overnight. It fermented through comparison, pride, and humiliation. Holder did not see Nipsey as inspiration. He saw him as proof that he had been left behind. In places where respect equals survival, that feeling can turn poisonous. Pride becomes fragile. Reputation becomes currency. Any perceived slight feels existential. The encounter that day did not begin with hostility. It looked ordinary. A conversation between two men who shared history. Words exchanged in daylight. No raised voices. No public scene. To witnesses, nothing seemed wrong. But beneath that calm surface lived a dangerous code. Street culture often treats rumors as verdicts. Accusations carry weight even without proof. The word snitch is not a label. It is a threat. When that word enters a conversation, logic disappears. Nipsey reportedly mentioned rumors circulating about Holder. It may have been meant as guidance. A warning to protect oneself. A message from someone who understood how fast things could spiral. But intent does not matter when pride is wounded. Holder heard disrespect. He heard exposure. He heard humiliation. In his mind, the conversation shifted from concern to challenge. From private words to public damage. The streets do not forgive perceived weakness. They punish it. Holder walked away. That moment mattered. He had time. Space. Opportunity to leave. Instead, the feeling grew. Shame turned into rage. Rage demanded action. He returned not to talk, but to assert control. The shots happened in front of the store Nipsey built. The place symbolized everything he believed in. Ownership. Independence. Giving back. The attack shattered more than a body. It shattered an idea. Witnesses described actions meant to demean. Violence layered with insult. A final message of dominance. The kind meant not only to end a life but to erase dignity. In that moment, the hatred was personal. Deeply personal. The aftermath stunned the community. Mourning filled the streets. People gathered at the exact location where blood had been spilled. Candles. Messages. Silence heavy with disbelief. The question echoed everywhere. Why did he stay? Holder fled but did not escape consequences. He was identified quickly. Arrest followed. The legal process unfolded slowly, methodically. In the end, the verdict was clear. A sentence designed to last longer than memory. Prison walls closed around him. No legacy. No admiration. No meaning gained. The emptiness remained. The contrast he once resented became permanent. One name honored worldwide. The other remembered only for destruction. Nipsey Hussle's death reignited a painful debate. Does giving back put a target on your back? Is loyalty to place noble or naive? Should success demand distance from danger? There is no answer that fits every life. His philosophy called for patience. The marathon. Long effort over short reward. Ironically, his life ended because others could not run that race. They wanted instant recognition. Immediate respect. Fast outcomes. The streets did not change overnight. But conversations did. About safety. About boundaries. About the cost of staying close to roots that still bleed. About whether heroes can survive where trauma never left. Nipsey chose presence. He believed healing required proximity. His death showed how unfinished that healing remains. Where you stand on the question of staying or leaving may reveal what you believe responsibility truly means. Next, the story shifts to a woman who walked alone through familiar streets, unaware that anonymity would not protect her when the music stopped. Part 5, MIA Zapata. Seattle in the grunge years felt raw and unpolished. Rain soaked the streets. Music spilled out of basements and small bars. The scene valued honesty over perfection. It welcomed anger, vulnerability, and defiance. In that environment, Mia Zapata stood out not because she was gentle, but because she was fearless. Mia was the voice of a band that carried the spirit of punk without apology. Her presence challenged expectations placed on women in heavy music. She did not soften her sound. She did not perform for approval. She took the stage with confidence and grit, proving that strength did not need permission. To many, she became a quiet symbol of independence and resistance. She was not famous in the mainstream sense. She did not live behind gates or travel with protection. She moved through the city like anyone else. That normalcy mattered to her. It also made her vulnerable. This story is not about a fan who crossed a line. It is not about obsession or admiration turned dark. The man who ended Mia's life did not know her music. He did not know her name. He did not care who she was. That is what makes this case so frightening. Jesus Mesquia drifted through the city unnoticed. He lived on the margins. He carried a history of aggression toward women. He was not stalking a performer. He was hunting opportunity. His danger came from randomness, not fixation. On the night it happened, Mia spent time with friends in a familiar place. Laughter. Conversation. The ordinary comfort of belonging. When she left, she chose to walk. The distance was short. The streets felt known. She wore headphones and moved with the ease of someone who believed the night belonged to her as much as anyone else. That belief should never be punished. Yet it often is. Somewhere along her route, she crossed paths with someone who saw her not as a person, but as a target. There was no argument. No prior connection. Only a sudden eruption of violence in a quiet place. The attack was brutal and dehumanizing. It stripped away dignity before taking life. The details are difficult to absorb, even years later. What matters most is not the cruelty itself, but how easily it happened. A woman alone. A man willing to harm. A city asleep. Her body was found hours later. The discovery sent shock through Seattle. Fear spread quickly, especially among women who recognized themselves in her routine. Walking home. Headphones on. Trusting familiarity. The music community responded immediately. Grief turned into action. Artists organized benefits. Venues raised money. Friends demanded answers. The city felt smaller and more dangerous overnight. Despite attention and effort, the case went cold. Evidence existed, but technology lagged behind need. Years passed. Leads faded. The person responsible continued living freely, moving on as if nothing had happened. For a decade, justice remained out of reach. That silence hurt almost as much as the crime itself. It suggested that some lives disappear without resolution. That randomness wins. Then science caught up. A small trace left behind became meaningful years later. Advances in DNA analysis opened a door that had once been sealed. A match finally emerged. The name surfaced. The face gained definition. The randomness found accountability. Jesus Mesquia was arrested. He denied responsibility. The evidence spoke clearly. The process concluded with conviction. The sentence arrived long after the loss had reshaped lives. Closure came late, but it came. For many, the outcome offered limited comfort. No ruling could return Mia. No verdict could erase the fear planted in the minds of countless women. Her death became a reminder carried silently every time someone checked over their shoulder on a dark street. Mia Zapata did not die because she was famous. She died because she was alone at the wrong moment. That truth connects her to millions of others whose stories never reach headlines. Her legacy lives in music and memory, but also in awareness. In conversations about safety. In community efforts to protect one another. In the understanding that danger does not always announce itself. This case forces a difficult realization. Sometimes the greatest threat has no interest in who you are. Only that you exist. How you interpret this story may depend on whether you believe cities can truly keep women safe after dark. Next, the danger evolves again, moving into a world where a single shared location turns everyday life into a fatal mistake. Part 6, PNB Rock. PNB Rock carried the sound of Philadelphia with him. His music blended melody and pain, survival and vulnerability. He came from streets that demanded toughness and learned how to turn experience into art. Success did not erase where he came from. It followed him, shaping how he moved and how he trusted. Los Angeles promised distance from old dangers. Sunlight. Opportunity. A feeling of arrival. He built a life that looked stable. He was independent. He was in love. He was a father. That afternoon felt ordinary. No performance. No studio session. Just lunch. The restaurant was familiar. A cultural landmark. Comfort food. Laughter. The rhythm of a normal day. Nothing about the moment suggested risk. Plates arrived. Conversation flowed. A small act of happiness felt worth sharing. A photograph of food appeared online. A casual post. A location tag. Something millions of people do without consequence. In a digital world, this felt harmless. In reality, it became a signal. Social media collapses distance. It turns private moments into coordinates. For public figures, that transformation can be dangerous. Visibility becomes vulnerability. Attention becomes exposure. What followed revealed how modern crime adapts. The people responsible were not strangers passing by. They were watching patterns. Tracking movement. Waiting for confirmation. The post did not create the threat. It confirmed it. The structure behind the crime was disturbing. A father orchestrated events from a distance. He did not enter the restaurant. He did not confront anyone. He sent his own son. A teenager carrying expectations he did not fully understand. Guidance twisted into control. Authority turned into manipulation. The young person approached the table with intent shaped by someone else's decisions. What began as a robbery attempt escalated instantly. Panic replaced words. Resistance met fear. In moments like these, outcomes become irreversible. PNB Rock fell in the middle of a place meant for comfort. A space built for families and conversation turned silent. Patrons froze. Time slowed. The ordinary shattered. Emergency response followed. Efforts were made. They were not enough. The loss was immediate and final. News spread faster than understanding. Grief collided with outrage. Online reaction became another wave of damage. Blame shifted quickly. Fingers pointed toward the person who shared the photo. Accusations flooded timelines. A woman who had just experienced unimaginable trauma became a target. The internet demanded a villain that felt easier to attack. Investigators told a different story. Evidence showed planning. Patterns. Intent that existed before the post. The location tag was not the cause. It was one factor among many. The responsibility belonged to those who chose harm. Arrests followed. Charges were filed. Details emerged that deepened the horror. A parent willing to sacrifice a child's future for stolen value. A teenager pulled into consequences that would last a lifetime. Greed framed as opportunity. Family loyalty weaponized. This case became a symbol of the digital age. Not because it was unique, but because it was familiar. Many people share locations daily. Many believe proximity equals safety. Many forget how quickly information travels. PNB Rock's death forced uncomfortable conversations. About posting in real time. About privacy as protection. About how fame changes risk even during mundane moments. It also exposed how quickly society assigns blame without facts. His legacy now includes caution. A reminder that online habits have offline consequences. That joy shared publicly can be intercepted. That technology rewards openness without offering defense. The tragedy sits at the intersection of culture, economics, and digital behavior. It is not about fear of sharing. It is about awareness of context. Understanding that not everyone watching wishes well. PNB Rock survived environments designed to break people. He was taken during a moment of peace. That contrast is what haunts. Not the chaos of the streets, but the normality of lunch. This story leaves a difficult question behind. How much responsibility does the digital world place on those who live in public view? Next, the narrative moves backward in time to a jazz innovator whose refusal to share a stage revealed how entitlement can turn admiration into destruction. Part 7, Eddie Jefferson. Eddie Jefferson had already lived a full life in music. He was not chasing trends or validation. He had shaped jazz itself, giving voice to melodies that once belonged only to instruments. His style turned improvisation into language. His influence traveled quietly through clubs, records, and the voices of singers who followed his path. In his later years, recognition finally caught up with him. Audiences grew again. Bookings returned. Critics spoke of a renaissance. At an age when many artists fade from view, Eddie was once more stepping into light. He walked onto stages with calm confidence earned through decades of work. He did not live behind gates. He did not move with guards. Jazz legends of his generation walked the streets like ordinary men. After shows, they carried their instruments, laughed with friends, and drove themselves home. The world they came from had not prepared them for danger disguised as admiration. Among those watching Eddie was a man who believed he deserved the same spotlight. A dancer without a claim. A hanger-on who stood near stages and imagined himself inside the applause. He followed Eddie from venue to venue. He asked repeatedly for a chance to perform. Not a request. A demand disguised as ambition. Eddie listened. He was polite. He was firm. His performances were carefully shaped. Space on stage mattered. Saying no was not cruelty. It was professionalism. To most people, rejection is temporary. To a fragile ego, it can feel like erasure. The man did not hear a boundary. He heard humiliation. He convinced himself that Eddie was blocking his destiny. That greatness was being stolen from him by someone older, established, unwilling to share. Resentment replaced respect. Obsession replaced patience. The night of the final performance felt triumphant. The music was strong. The crowd responded. Eddie shared the stage with trusted collaborators. The room carried joy and release. Nothing suggested it would be the last time he played. After the show, Eddie stepped outside. No entourage. No escort. Just musicians heading toward their cars, still warmed by applause. The street was quiet. Detroit air heavy with night. A vehicle approached. Windows lowered. There were no words. No argument. No warning. The sound that followed ended a life that had shaped a genre. Eddie fell where music had just lived. On pavement. Under streetlight. Away from any stage. The attacker fled. Silence returned too quickly. Shock settled in. Those present struggled to understand how admiration had turned into destruction. The contrast was unbearable. A man who spent his life creating harmony taken by someone consumed by envy. News spread through the jazz community. Grief came with anger. Questions rose about protection. About why pioneers walked alone. About how reverence for art had never translated into safety for its creators. The person responsible was identified and captured. The explanation offered was thin. Delusion mixed with entitlement. The belief that rejection justified retaliation. That talent owed opportunity. That the stage belonged to anyone who wanted it badly enough. Eddie Jefferson's death exposed a quiet vulnerability. Older artists often exist without security. They come from an era where trust was assumed. Where audiences were smaller. Where distance existed naturally. The modern world had changed around them without warning. His passing forced reflection on how the industry treats its elders. Celebrated in words. Forgotten in protection. Honored in history. Exposed in reality. Eddie left behind music that continues to speak. Every time a singer gives words to a horn line, his influence breathes again. His legacy remains intact. The manner of his death does not define his work. It defines the danger of unchecked resentment. This story lingers because it is not about fame at its peak. It is about quiet success and late recognition. About how jealousy can grow in the shadow of patience. Where responsibility lies may depend on how society values artists once the spotlight softens. Next, the journey moves to a world where music collides with organized power, and a single note handed on stage becomes a message no one can ignore. Part 8, Chelino Sanchez. Chelino Sanchez did not sing fiction. His songs were reports from a world where pride, loyalty, and death lived side by side. Narco Corrido was not entertainment removed from reality. It was testimony. Names mattered. Stories carried consequences. Audiences included people who recognized themselves in the lyrics and people who watched closely for disrespect. Chelino came from hardship and carried it into music without filters. He sang about men who survived by force and codes that ruled beyond courts. He did not polish the truth. He wore it. He moved as if the lines between stage and street did not exist because, for him, they never had. That authenticity built devotion and danger at the same time. His rise made him visible. Visibility in that world is a double edge. Songs travel farther than intentions. A verse can be interpreted as praise or accusation depending on who hears it. Cellino understood this risk. He had already faced threats. He had already survived attempts meant to silence him. Survival fed the legend and hardened his resolve. The night of the concert felt tense before anything happened. The venue was packed. The air heavy. People drank and watched with expectation. Cellino stepped on stage knowing the weight of where he stood. This was not a neutral place. This was home territory for forces that did not tolerate mistakes. Mid-performance, a man approached the stage. Not a request for a song. Not a greeting. A folded piece of paper pressed into Cellino's hand. Cameras caught the moment. The music continued as he opened it. Words written small. Direct. Final. His face changed. Not panic. Recognition. A calculation done quickly. He looked out at the crowd as if searching for an answer that would not come. Sweat gathered. Breath slowed. For a brief moment, the entire room waited. Cellino made a choice. He placed the paper aside. He continued singing. The decision carried meaning. Pride. Defiance. Acceptance. No one in that room misunderstood what it signaled. Finishing the song was not bravery for applause. It was a statement that fear would not interrupt his voice. The show ended. Applause followed. Cellino walked off stage alive. That detail matters because it proves the message was not a warning meant to be ignored. It was a contract already written. After the concert, he left with family members. The goal was distance. Roads watched by eyes that did not blink. Vehicles followed routines learned over years. Authority wore disguises. Uniforms meant little. Signals replaced questions. A stop occurred. Men claimed power. Badges appeared. In places where lines blur, resistance invites consequences for everyone nearby. Cellino stepped away to protect those with him. That choice ended his night. By morning, the body was found near water. Bound. Silent. The method was clinical. The message clear. Music had crossed a boundary. The response was final. Official answers never arrived. They were not expected. In that region, truth lives in whispers and certainty exists without paperwork. Everyone knew who ordered it. No one needed confirmation. Cellino's death transformed him. Sales surged. Stories grew. The image of him reading the note became a symbol. A man staring at fate and choosing to finish his song. For many, that moment defined courage. For others, it defined inevitability. The legend expanded beyond borders. New listeners discovered his voice. Old fans spoke of destiny. The genre gained mythology. Artists learned the limits of what could be said aloud. Some pulled back. Others leaned in. His life proved narco corrido was not metaphor. Lyrics could summon attention from people who did not clap. Music could trigger responses that no stage protection could stop. Cellino Sanchez remains a warning written in melody. He lived by his words and paid for them. The line between art and consequence never felt thinner. How you interpret his final decision depends on whether you believe defiance is freedom or resignation. Next, the story returns to a different kind of darkness, where kindness toward the wrong people opened the door to a cult and a killing that changed history. Part 9, Gary Hinman. Gary Hinman was known for patience. A gentle teacher. A musician who believed sound could calm conflict. He opened his home easily. He listened more than he spoke. In a city overflowing with ambition, he represented trust. That trust would become the doorway to his end. He lived in Topanga Canyon, a place that attracted seekers and dreamers. His circle included people from the music world. Jam sessions. Conversations about art and meaning. Through those connections, he crossed paths with a men who wanted everything music promised and none of the discipline it required. Charles Manson believed fame was owed to him. Not earned. Ode. He spoke in riddles and prophecies. He presented himself as a guide. To followers, he was certainty in human form. To Gary, he was another lost soul passing through. Manson wanted money. He convinced himself it existed. An inheritance. Hidden wealth. A resource meant to fund his visions. When reality refused to match belief, blame followed. Gary became the obstacle in a fantasy built on entitlement. Members of the group arrived at Gary's home without force. He let them in. Familiar faces. No alarms raised. Conversation shifted quickly. Requests turned into demands. When Gary told them the truth, that no money existed, the atmosphere hardened. What followed was captivity. Days stretched. Time lost meaning. Pressure replaced dialogue. Gary was restrained in his own space. Appeals to reason failed. Kindness no longer worked. Control became the goal. Manson arrived later. His presence changed everything. He carried authority and menace without raising his voice. He brought a blade not as a weapon alone, but as theater. Violence as message. A cut delivered to mark obedience. Pain turned into ritual. He left after that moment. Orders given without explanation. Loyalty tested. The responsibility of finishing the act handed to followers eager to prove devotion. In cult logic, hesitation equals betrayal. Gary endured days of suffering. He remained calm. He spoke of peace. He refused to confirm a lie. That refusal sealed his fate. The decision to end his life was framed as necessity. An erasure of a witness. A sacrifice to a delusion. The act itself was not impulsive. It was deliberate. Quiet. Final. Afterwards, words were written to mislead. Symbols chosen to provoke chaos. An attempt to redirect blame and accelerate a fantasy of collapse. This was the first killing tied directly to the group. A threshold crossed. Blood bound the members together. There was no return to innocence. What followed would escalate into terror that defined an era. Gary Hinman became a forgotten name beneath louder headlines. His death served as rehearsal. Proof of concept. A test of loyalty that succeeded too well. When the truth surfaced, shock followed. Arrests came. Connections unraveled. The story revealed how easily idealism can be exploited. How generosity becomes vulnerability in the presence of manipulation. The late 60s had promised liberation. Love. Community. Gary believed in those promises. His death marked their fracture. The decade did not end with celebration. It ended with fear. This case forces reflection on how cults function. They do not begin with cruelty. They begin with belonging. They attract through warmth. They isolate through belief. Violence arrives only after trust is secured. Gary Hinman was not reckless. He was compassionate. He did not imagine kindness could be weaponized so completely. That misunderstanding cost him everything. Responsibility extends beyond the individuals who carried out orders. It includes the charisma that convinced others to surrender judgment. The hunger for meaning that overrides empathy. As history moved on, Gary's name faded. Yet his death sits at the foundation of a nightmare that followed. The first crack before the collapse. What lessons can be drawn from a man who opened his door and paid with his life may depend on how you view trust itself. Next, the final story leaves music and enters fashion, where obsession with fame reached its most glamorous and devastating form. Part 10, Gianni Versace. Gianni Versace lived at the intersection of music and fashion. He dressed performers who shaped sound and image at the same time. Runways felt like concerts. Fabrics moved with rhythm. His vision turned clothing into spectacle and designers into stars. He did not just follow culture. He amplified it. His life reflected that amplification. Sunlight on marble. Open doors. No fences. A belief that beauty thrived in openness. He walked his neighborhood as if fame were armor. Routine became comfort. Comfort became habit. That habit was visible. Predictable. Known. Andrew Cunanan watched from the margins. He was intelligent and charming when he wanted to be. He told stories that shifted with the listener. Lies came easily. Each one placed him closer to the life he believed he deserved. He did not want proximity. He wanted replacement. In his mind, success was not earned. It was taken. He measured himself against icons and decided the difference was theft. If he could not achieve their position, he would erase the distance by destroying the source. Cunanan carried fantasies that fed on attention. He claimed connections that barely existed. Brief encounters became lifelong bonds. Admiration hardened into entitlement. Entitlement curdled into envy. Before Miami, there was a trail. Friends. Acquaintances. Strangers who crossed his path at the wrong moment. Each act escalated his confidence. Each escape reinforced the belief that he was untouchable. Law enforcement searched. The public watched. He moved anyway. By the time he reached the coast, the pursuit had tightened. Posters circulated. Names were known. Yet he did not hide. He waited. The destination mattered more than survival. Versace's mornings followed a pattern. A short walk. A familiar cafe. Magazines tucked under an arm. The simplicity contrasted with the grandeur behind him. It was a private ritual inside a public life. That morning, the air was calm. The street felt ordinary. He returned home as he always did. Steps warmed by sun. A gate opening inward. Cunanan approached from behind. No confrontation. No demand. The moment was swift and final. The threshold of a palace became a boundary between life and absence. The quiet afterward carried shock heavier than sound. Neighbors reacted. Help arrived. The damage could not be undone. Blood marked stone that had welcomed guests and artists from around the world. A symbol of openness became a scene of loss. The city froze. Sirens cut through heat. Media descended. Questions multiplied. How could someone so visible be so exposed? How could routine survive infamy? The manhunt intensified. Streets closed. Waterways searched. Days passed under pressure. Cunanan hid close by, moving through spaces designed to be overlooked. When discovery became inevitable, he chose an ending that denied explanation. His death closed the chase but opened a void. Motive remained fractured. Was it obsession with a person or worship of fame itself? Was it desire or resentment? The answers vanished with him. Justice felt incomplete. A trial would have forced truth into light. Families would have heard reasons even if they rejected them. Instead, silence settled. Speculation replaced certainty. Versace's funeral gathered worlds together. Music and fashion mourned as one. Tribute spoke of generosity and daring. His work continued to walk stages and streets. His influence did not end where his life did. The case reshaped how public figures viewed safety. Openness reconsidered. Patterns broken. Beauty protected by distance it never wanted. This story endures because it captures a collision. Worship meets narcissism. Visibility meets vulnerability. Routine meets fixation. The lesson is not fear of success. It is respect for its gravity. What remains is a question without a neat answer. Does society create mirrors that fragile minds cannot withstand? Or does responsibility rest solely with those who choose harm? Where you place that responsibility may reflect how you understand fame itself. If you are still here, carry this final image forward as the series ends, because what follows next will ask whether admiration can ever exist without danger.